Hello, welcome again to another episode of Global Pause Rethink the Future podcast, where we're dealing with our market orientated way of life. So, today's episode, we're going to be looking at the diminishing returns of being a consumer. Now, diminishing returns, usually economics always talks about diminishing returns in reference to production. Ultimately, we are a product. We're a product of our way of life. We're sold as a consumer. We are sold on being a consumer. All right, our agency is defined according to our want. You're only given credit for your wants. It doesn't extend beyond your demand. The form of life that we take, we adhere to in order to be orientated towards the life that we presuppose. So I often talk about, in order to become a consumer, then you're really looking at the ideal of independence. You're securing your independence against the relationality that a market-orientated way of life engenders. To be market-orientated is not just to buy shit. To be market-orientated is about capturing your temporality, because your time is an economic good and it's never not an economic good, irrespective of whether or not it's your labour or your leisure. I've talked about this ad infinitum. But why it's good to look at the diminishing returns of the form of life that we inhabit, because that's what we're sold as. All right, that's the denominator. So the context here is that the citizen is not the denominator for our way of life to be market orientated. All right, because the thing is that to be market orientated, irrespective of where you are on the planet, well, that's the way how you're given. You're given as a consumer. So you can be, in France, you can be in Japan, you can be in India, you can be in China and Australia. It doesn't matter. So the commonality, the reductionism, the diminution of what it means to be, that's the foundational basis for any thinking. So that's the form of life. Now, it's important in the aspect that if we're looking at what's beyond that form, I always talk about this, that if we've been sold on a way of life and that's the form that we take, then to potentialize life means to say that the form that we inhabit shifts, changes, it morphs. Okay, so, but the context for that potential, which is obviously futural, one of the things that we can do in order to explain this dynamic of the diminishing returns is to understand trends within the market and give context to the form of life that's presupposed, and how the trends that have been engendered are a way of trying to generate a return. All right, but it's what it's doing, it's suffering the inherent contradictions or spiritual poverty of our way. That form of life is coming to the fore, and so what it's doing, it's throwing up these things that these trends that are trying to make good on, or just essentially just monetizing discontent or the spiritual disease, but in a way that is essentially still trying to generate a return on that form of life. And so that's the reason why we can say it's diminishing. It's diminishing in the sense of, well, how? So let's look at the context that we can look at it to be market orientated is just to look at the frame of reference is really post-war. So it's a good way of understanding maybe the dynamics between the generations as well. It's not beholden to it, but it's a good way of looking at the baby boomers v, say, millennials, and then have an understanding of the dynamic that's occurring, then to understand that that's in reference to the form of life. So what we'll do is we'll explore, and this is all impressionistic, because it's ultimately we're looking at the form and what's presupposed. So, post-war, it's this, after the war, there was the euphoria, obviously the war ending, and then mass market consumerism really came to its fore. So you were sold, the whole thing about marketing and branding and advertising was really when it hit its straps. So that the euphoria or the idealism or the positivity that is all encapsulated with these visions of the future that we are very much aware of. If you go look at, the advertising of the era. So the thing is that you are sold a vision of life, all right? So whether or not it's a white picket fence, whether or not it's a traditional thing, it's immaterial or whatever. They're visions. They're always visions of life. And this is the one thing. It's just always a vision of. Now, the context for here is that ultimately being a consumer, well, you're only given credit for your wants. Keeping up with the Joneses is, in this case, is just looking at the acquisitive mimesis that is engendered as a result of the way how life gets envisaged or is visioned, and then the models mediate the preoccupation. And so therefore you're meant to disinhibit your way towards a station of life that's commensurable to the means that you make of yourself. And yet if you're in that social milieu where you're comparing one against the other, well, then all you do is that you have a ratcheting up that is essentially trying to differentiate yourself through what you buy, or the signs of a transcendence. So transcendence here is what? Well, it's just the claim that money has over your temporality or your life. So, but the form of life that's presupposed, being a consumer, is never brought to the fore. Obviously, it's not. So it doesn't. This is the thing why I say that, irrespective of whether or not you're a pauper, so really poor, a person doesn't have any means, or you're really uber wealthy, it's the same form of life. You're a consumer. It doesn't matter if you secured your time, because if we're looking at to what it means to be market orientated, is the way how that it captures your temporality. And the exceptionalism that you can demonstrate in your life is a lifestyle vision, and it's not resolving upon the creativity, because you're only given, your agency is defined according to your want. So your want of life, rather than the way how that you can make it an exception to the form of life. This is where I'm going. Well, then you can only, that form, irrespective of how much wealth you have, is what you will always be. You'll always have a commercial or the relationality with other people on the everydayness will be defined by want. So the context here is that the vision that was sold was all consumable. So it's all about making life easier. So whether or not you're looking at the development of homewares, and then the way how that, you're styling the supplement basically of the house or the domestic sphere, it was all about objects, consumables, and all these other things. Okay, so, but the issue that was raised in the probably pre the 60s, maybe in the 50s or whatever, or there was eco consideration. So people realised that the consumerism engendered a lot of obviously negative externalities of production or our way of life. So that's consumerism. And so the externalities was an issue. And so the ecological cost associated with that way of life started to, raise people's awareness in reference to that form of life. And so therefore you had the counterculture revolution. That was a response to that. All right. So here the context is it's still it's orientated towards things. Okay. So but there was externalities. Now, if you extend that further, and you're bringing it up maybe into, well, it varies. But if you're looking at now, let's look at it from the aspect of cause marketing and whatnot. So you have the scenario of why is it that now that you have that businesses will tout values or ideals? Okay, so because if the trend here is that the good or the surface is not good enough, yes, because if you're looking at, if a person's agency is defined by their want, so essentially what they buy, and yet the form of life that you take diminishes what it means to be as a human being, you're only given credit for your wants, then ultimately you have to look at, well, how can we give more meaning to a person's consumption, because that's the extent of their agency. So what you do is you add on a supplementary meaning that is otherwise not given of a strict, narrow understanding of self-interest. So if you're looking at the way how the negative externalities of, that relates to sustainability is a classic example, but then you extend beyond the issues of the production process that relates to a specific business, and then you're looking really at a way of life. And so they're looking at, say, what would be another negative externality that's not necessarily within the target market. Well, it relates to poverty that can be on somewhere else. So you're looking at the material deprivation that other people are subjected to. So therefore, if you buy from a specific company, then you have what you buy has more meaning because it aids the development or aids to remove this material deprivation. So you have a market for meaning. All right, so the market for meaning is important in the context of the development of the mass market in general, because if it's not good enough, just for goods and services, and that because if the vision of life that's been given is realised that it's not sustainable, and obviously it's not sustainable, but we address sustainability. We only really looking at the production consumption nexus and not looking at the claim on your temporality that creates a certain relationality that impoverishes the world that you share when you're orientated towards securing your time as a supplement in order to style it in the manner of your aspirations. You marginalise the world, and so therefore you have to try share within that world. And yet, how can you when the world is beholden to primarily to these private considerations of consumption? That's your average relationality with other people. You don't have a sense of community, or if you do, it's supplementary, and so therefore it's subordinate to it. So the issue here is that if the goods and services aren't good enough, then it's saying the market for meaning is just added on. Why? Well, then because there's an issue with our way of life. And so the way how it's... So if we're looking at the form of life that you take and you're only given credit for your wants, and the wants are connected into what's the want? It's the want of... So if it's a want of shampoo or the want of a house or want of a car or want of lifestyle, but if that lifestyle is not sustainable, then the intangibles of values is a one thing that can add value to the buyer's journey. But the buyer's journey here is not in context to a vision of an unsustainable life. The journey here is beyond the vision, that because it's not sustainable, but then it's that you're monetizing the discontent. But the thing here is that the value associated with that will obviously goes into specific companies that are differentiating themselves, because they realise if that's a trend within the market, then it's pointing towards the diminishing returns of being given as a consumer. So if a consumer is an impoverishment, which is no doubt is, then how do you generate a return on that poverty? Well, obviously you start to engage the intangibles of life, their spiritual aspirations. It's not their spiritual aspirations in the way how I always frame it when you're looking at an existential claim on your temporality, but you're looking at values. All right, but values here, the context here is for values, is that if you have a value you value meaning, all right, but that meaning is connected to your purchasing or your activism. All right, as far as your buying goes, can only add value to the company that is spruiking those values. You might think that you have greater purpose, but really, how disconnected are you from the significance or the ramifications of your actions? And so this is the whole point, is that it substantiates the relationality of want and not creativity. So you're still the person, you're still a consumer, they're still at arm's length, because it substantiates the relationality. So when you're looking at the development within the market economy as far as the diminishing returns on the form of life, that's why intangibles are given at the end of that form of life. It's saying to you, because to monetize discontent in this context is to generate a return on it. Okay, now you can say that that's a cynical way of approaching it, but the issue here is that if you've got the development of the negative externalities that relates to ecological issues, but then the negative externalities of the impoverishment of what it means to be, the lack of community, meaning, crass consumerism, acquisitive mimesis, a lack of shared purpose, as it were. All these things, what are that? They are negative externalities of the diminution of what it means to be. So the form of life that we take. So in the context of being market orientated, and this is why it's an issue of being market orientated. And I say market orientated, I always say it is not your wants. Your wants are primary because money is a given, but money is a given because why? Because that we presuppose our time as an economic good, and that's the way how that we secure the time as a supplement. All right, we conflate our time equals money. So when you're looking at the context of an intangible, this is the thing here. It's So if you're talking at like a business, you're looking at, say, any cause that they might tout, it's all right. So it's a want It's a want for change. So the Great Reset is a classic example of propaganda. They realise that there's discontent with our way of life, and so therefore the propaganda is to market change. All right, because there's a want for change. If there's meaning, it's a want for meaning. If it's about identity, and so therefore to get meaning. All right, what's identity? It's just about if you're given a consumer, and so therefore you have recourse to your heritage, and that gives you meaning. Well, then you're gonna market that because that will give you meaning. Because otherwise, to be a consumer is to have no fucking meaning. You are become amorphous blob, and so therefore you have the recourse back to the safety of what it means to be when you identify with something that's not just about what you buy. You're giving credit. Well, what are you giving credit for in that context, other than a remainder? And if you have what you're doing is, well, you're going to try to get value out of that. All right. So the thing is that you're past the point of no return. If you're a consumer, you're a consumer. It doesn't matter fucking who you are. This is the whole point about it. They're niches for realization. They're niches. That's all they are. They're niches. And a niche does what? It conceals the existential claim, because then the niche is marketed to generate value on the diminishing return on the form of life that's never fucking questioned. Right, so the issue here is that these values, and they can be anything, they're all intangibles. Let's just call them intangibles. All right. The thing about intangibles is that they're all not designed, because it's not to say that it's done with intentionality. It's probably not. But it's the way how that they're given conceals the intangible of the existential claim over your very existence. All right. So the thing is that, so if you're looking at it from that perspective, and so, well, what would that be? Well, that relates to your time. And as I say, if we are marginal in reference to life, because we presuppose we have to be a means towards the end, our time is an economic good, and we're securing our time as a supplement. Right? There's no place for the market for your time. I always keep on saying that. We're utopian, you can't see it. All right, so because you can't see it. Right? Because you value your time. And the only reason why you value your time is because you're securing it as a supplement. You've individualized it. And that whole dynamic, that whole mechanism, being beholden to an unavowed religiosity or utopianism or the end of history, and you can't see it, if that's never addressed, then you're never addressing the form of life. Well, how can we say that? The form of life is the form of being a consumer, all right? What is that? Well, you don't have any agency. You're not given credit for creating the world. The world is a given. It's managed on your behalf, all right? So if you were to look at, because why? Well, then you could say, well, life is individualized. Well, then the ideal of independence. The ideal of independence is a critical thing. Why is the ideal of independence important? Because you are trying to remove the claim that money has over your life. And so it's a freedom from that claim. And that's the way how we define independence. And that's the reason why you're only given credit for your wants, because you have a want of life. You have a want of life, but because you've individualized it, you are put in a holding pattern. All right, and so you are marginal in reference to life. This is why I say that once you become a consumer, you can never not be a consumer. All right, it doesn't matter. You can have recourse to all the identities that you want, but the form of life that you inhabit is what is the underwriter to any identity that you give, because it's just then it will become a niche. So the issue here, the diminishing returns. Why is the diminishing returns important? So if you're looking at it futurely, well, what does that mean for any potential for civilization on the planet now? You have to change the form of life. So you have to have. So I advocate a product return. So what is a product return? In this product return is you being a consumer. So what would a product return entail? Well, you give them more credit than your wants. The relationality shifts from want to creativity. You have to have the ideal of independence is no longer the ideal worthy of your life. It's interdependence, because we are always interdependent. We are never not interdependent. But the myth is sold because of the existential claim that works on you. And it's not, the issue is not money per se. It's the fact that it's a claim on our temporality that we presuppose time as an economic good. So it's derivative. All right. And if it's derivative and we produce ourselves in that form, we are responsible for the form of life that we attain or that we conform to. Okay. So there's nobody else to blame other than ourselves because we've been sold on it. We sell ourselves out. We sell ourselves on the visions of what constitutes life. And so we sell the lifestyle vision that sits over actual life because we've circumscribed or limited our agency or the extent of our possibility to that. We don't think that creativity or our actions extend beyond creating the world. And so as a result of that, we thwart or we limit ourselves. And because we limit ourselves, we become as small as the actions that we demonstrate. I mean, it's just common sense. So the issue here, to look at the diminishing returns of a consumer and to see past that, is the way how that you become indivisible as a person, because we presuppose that we're indivisible, but we're always marginal because we've linearized our understanding of our temporality in a means and continuum, and because we presuppose individual timelines, because somehow time is now an economic good, or it's derivative, it's been produced, and so therefore the existential claim over life is just an absolute given. So here, the first step is to return the product that you sold for. So, you could look at an issue that we could look at is data, or your data that you leave on the internet is a way that is the traces of you being tracked or you being profiled as is only given credit for your wants. But here, so the return of data, to a certain degree, you can see that as a sign. That's my form of life. I accept that, but I don't accept that you can just collect data off me. Maybe you can see without my consent, but maybe you can see that there's something there in that outline. That's what it is. It's an outline because it's an outline on the form of life that's presupposed. So maybe you can think through that. And what it's saying to you, well, hang on, my data just presupposes that I'm a consumer. How about if I want to return myself being the product that I am? Well, beyond the aspiration, so what comes first is the aspiration and the creative initiative that would potentialize that. What you're doing is you're becoming more indivisible as a people. You can only do this if you become a people. A people becomes indivisible because if we're marginal, then the way how you reconcile your marginality is through the way how that you release the marginality through what you do with other people, through the way how that you share, the way how you give and receive, and what you give people credit for their creativity to create the world. It's a completely different way and then through doing that, you are shifting the dynamic you're shifting the rationale for that form of life that we otherwise presuppose. So when you're looking at getting back to the issue of the product that we're sold as, the more that's involved with trying to get people to buy, right? But they've been sold prior. All right, this I always say that, and this is this common marketing knowledge that, only people buy because they've been sold prior. So sold prior is not sold on the specific good that the specific company is marketing. It's just you've just been sold on that way of life. This is the issue. So when you're sold on that way of life, what does that mean? You've been sold on being a consumer, and what it means to be a consumer, the extent of your agency, not giving credit to create the world, the individualization of life, the securing of life as a supplement, and it even goes right back to the issue of money, which transcends obviously mass marketing. But then you're looking at if there's an existential claim on your temporality and you're beholden to an unavowed utopianism and you can't see it, it's important from the aspect of to be a consumer is not about buying shit, like I always say. It's about the claim on your temporality. So the only way that you can remove a claim on your temporality is through a common surpassing that you share with other people. And a common surpassing would mean to say that the form of life that you share with other people starts to shift, starts to change. So when you're looking at the threshold of getting back to the trend within the market, there's something that you can see through that trend of intangibles. It's pointing towards the nature of that unavowed utopianism that we're beholden to. Because if you push it to the nth degree and you're talking there's a problem with the form of life, and at the moment everything that's being given is just about monetizing the discontent, All right. And so therefore preserving the buyer's journey of life, there's a journey of life that's not a buyer's journey. Okay. It's not. It's because it goes beyond buying. It goes beyond the price mechanism as an arbiter for the future. It relates to the relationality. I always say that the price mechanism is contingent upon the relationality. You change your relationality and the price has no context in reference to the relationality because it's an artful way of life. It's a different way of giving and receiving. We can't see it. Why? Well, because we presuppose so much. Anyway, I just thought that looking at the diminishing returns of our form of life or being a consumer is a good way to see that if you can see through intangibles, you can see through to what it's pointing at, but it won't go beyond. Why? Because it means to say that you're unmarketing the relation, you're unmarketing civilization. All right, and we as a species can't envisage what life would be if we didn't. We think that's impossible, and it's not. It's not impossible. It's a limitation of our thinking. So we have to work within the margins that we accept for ourselves now to potentialize it beyond that. And so there's specific praxis that I always advocate that is the critical thing that can facilitate a change like that. And there's only one, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one way that you can do it, and that's what Enterprise Good has been set up for. Anyway, until next time, take care.